Okay, I am delighted to welcome Erin Shwiff, Director of Procurement Operations, Transformation and Strategic Initiatives at Western Union, to the podcast today from Colorado, I believe. Erin, is that correct?
Yes, yes, that's correct. It's
Well,
snowing today.
is it? Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, a snowy morning in Colorado, a rainy afternoon
Oh,
in London. Thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing?
good. Great.
Excellent
Excited
stuff.
to be here.
Good stuff. So we've got loads to discuss. So I'll get right into it. We're going to be talking about services procurement, the transformation journey, the contingent workforce angles, the procurement versus HR conversation. There's loads and loads for us to go through. Before we get into that, what would be really great is if you could just give a little bit of a background on how you came to be doing this role at Western Union, with what you're doing in terms of transformation and strategic initiatives, and also just a bit of an understanding of like how you got there. What's your journey been? What was your flight path? Where did you start out? Because I always find that interesting with regards to procurement because people bring different skills and different backgrounds to it, which is what makes the procurement function so interesting. So if you could give us a bit of an intro and background, that would be really great.
Sure. Yeah, so my history, I mean, I had some buyer experience early in my career, mostly in computer resellers back in the day. So I'm old and there were a lot of them. And back when I moved to Colorado, so I came with some procurement, basic procurement uh, history when I came to Colorado, but then soon got hired with a startup with Chipotle and in the IT department to do actually to roll out to roll out DSL in the restaurants to process credit cards. So I was I was on the restaurant team with a few other women actually, and we traveled a ton and did installs in all the restaurants and grew up within that organization from startup. So in 2001, I was there. I started there. Had a big, more IT background by that time, and kind of a project management feel too. So I was one of those people that were thriving in that sort of environment because every time something needed to be done, it was like I stepped up and said, "Okay, how are we going to do this?" And things like, how do we manage the budget in IT? How do we roll out, new POS hardware in the stores, things like that. So it was such a great opportunity for me not only to learn how to grow up in a professional environment, but also utilize the way my brain works, I would say, which is moving fast and just kind of taking on whatever needs to be fixed. So I feel like that was a great like foundation for me, and I can't even go into um, just that whole 16-year journey. So I literally grew up there. Um, but getting the opportunities that I kind of drove and was able to steer myself into different areas, which eventually led to IT procurement for the most part. I mean, being in that environment, it wasn't as formalized as where I am now, but it was an environment where, I led a team of, governance and procurement and financials, manage the budget and a little bit of contingent labor. I wouldn't say a little bit, but the contingent labor that we did was majority in the IT department. So I was running that from an international standpoint, not global like I am now, smaller scale, but really got my feet wet in that area and had 10 people on that team. It was more of a business, like an IT business team, is what I would call it. Now I would call it more of a procurement ops but just for IT. So for me, that experience, and I just put 16 years in a really short sentence, but that 16 years encompassed so much more. I met great people, and actually one of them works for me today at Western Union. So
Oh,
like
fantastic.
I built, she's my right-hand person and we can finish each other's sentences and we've been through, a lot together, which actually has been helping me drive the change that I have at Western Union. So flash forward, I mean, I think in between my two roles, so Western Union and Chipotle, because now I've almost been at Western Union for 10 years. It'll be 9 years this year. I feel like putting a decade in these days goes by really fast. 16 years felt like forever, and these 9 years have really just flown by. But In between those two roles, I kind of got myself into a position where I was so this way instead of this way.
Right.
So I had, like sales experience, I had buying experience, I had technical experience, I had, you know, financial experience, governance and compliance. I was there at Chipotle when we went public. So having all that experience of going from, private to public and all the SOX and PCI, like I just like absorbed as much as I could when I was there. So for me, it was a little bit difficult to find my place, like to find where was I going to go? And even I had recruiters saying, this is hard because you're so this way and instead of this way. Um, to this day, flash forward to my, where I am now in my career, I feel like it's the best thing that ever happened for me and my personality. I feel like this was something you can give me anything. You can give me I can go sit in marketing, I can go sit in accounting, I can go sit in wherever, and I'm going to find a path and something to fix and something to transform and people to lead, and to grow. So for my career, that was a positive. It's been a hard, situation. I think when people look at your resume, you're like, yeah, sure, you know all these things, but I've actually touched them enough and gone deep enough to where I can, affect the change in these different areas. Hopefully that makes sense. Um,
It's
when
very,
I
very
came in,
much. Sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say that sounds very much a symptom, and I'd say a positive symptom of kind of the startup environment, startup
yeah.
scale up. I mean, obviously, Chipotle, big went to scale rapidly, but
Yeah, I
that
want to,
broad.
yeah, to say something to that. I mean, we were working at 150%. And when came over to Western Union in the procurement department, and I'll get there in a second, I think I was in shock. I think all I ever knew, being there for 16 years was we had fun, a ton of fun, but we worked really hard and we worked really, we worked sometimes 7 days a week and I traveled and it was a different mentality. And I was around a bunch of people that had the same mindset. It's a different breed to want to be in a startup, I think, and actually do it. Until you've done it, you don't know. And I'm so grateful for that. Like I will forever, like, and I say this jokingly, but that was my schooling, my college, my career building was there. And but it definitely takes a certain person because I've hired a lot of, younger people now and I wish I could give them that experience. Like you wish you can give your kids all of your growing up experience. You wish you could just like make them feel and see all the things that you've seen, but you just can't. You just can't. You kind of have to live it. So coming to Western Union, in 2017, I got hired as an IT strategic sourcing manager. I took the role reluctantly. I enjoyed my interview, and I was told that there would be other opportunities. I could go anywhere once I got into Western Union. So I took a leap of faith, and I joined in the procurement department, and it just wasn't enough. I mean, sitting in a cubicle, you know, handling contracts, it just wasn't my procurement was one piece of all the things that I had done in my career, and to this day, it's not my favorite thing. Um, just doing that, like, the transactional portion of it, or just negotiations or just contracting, that's just not enough for me. So for me, I have to see things from a lot much larger picture and touch all of the different aspects. So gradually over time, I did that for a year and a half and joined, left the procurement department, joined a little change management mission within Western Union where, I learned lean practices and I handled a couple of different, change management projects within the company. Um, and decided, this is really my speed. This is what I should be doing. My second I had somebody that was on my team, my change management team, because I was part of one and then I ran one. And when I ran that one, I had a team of a couple of people that just came in as a stretch assignment, right? They left their roles and came in to do this change management for, 3 months and work on something within another function in the business. It gave me an opportunity to learn more about Western Union, and it also, I met more people. And in that, I met the somebody in the contingent labor
Right.
team. So then I got to know that person. We were doing an IT change management project, but this was a person that I met. So I decided they had an opening for a senior manager position in contingent labor. So I applied for that and I got that. And that was in early 2019. And by October of 2019, I inherited the whole thing. We did,
Wow.
s- we did a, we did some, we minimized our staffing within HR, and this was sitting in HR. So I'd never reported to HR my whole career, always IT. But I was hired into HR to handle that whole program and then handle background checks for the whole company globally. So those two things were in my wheelhouse. We had an MSP. I had never really done it at this formal of a level. So, I had a lot to learn. It was a little all over the place. And I think I was allowed to keep 5 people for both functions. They were analyst levels, in other countries. And I had to kind of pool them and get them going across the board. And really only one of them was doing contingent labor at the time. Our MSP was handling most of it. Uh, we had IQN
Right.
we had outdated technology. So it was a lot. And I'm used to technology and implementations, but this was a tool that it was just so archaic. They hadn't done any configuration changes in forever. So I jumped right in. I mean, and then COVID hit. So it was a lot of learning about how it was set up at Western Union, in parallel of dealing with the background checks, which was a whole other company
Yeah.
and global thing. So it was two different functions. I branched out a little bit, within my peer group in the industry, but again, this was years ago, trying to just kind of get some information from people, but really just trying to understand how is it set up? What is this? Like, what does this even look like? And gosh, I think back to that now and compared to what it is today, I was so confused. Honestly, Johnny, I was so confused. I mean, that was an area I had never really I don't know, dug into. And at Chipotle, we didn't have anything formal like this. We didn't have the MSP or anything. You're
Well,
gonna ask your question?
yeah, that's where being the type of person who gets out and asks the questions is really valuable,
Hmm.
because there's always somebody who's working on something similar, or maybe come across, or their company's been through a particular thing that you're about to go through. But it's getting out there in the market and asking your peers, and actually, that inquiring mind. That's
Yes.
the most important thing, isn't it? Especially if you're
Yes.
willing to dive into new situations.
Yes, and internally, I mean, nobody really knew what was going on. Nobody really knew. It literally was 2 full-time employees that had it before me. So it was confusing. Like the rebate structure was confusing. All of it was confusing. I just, it took me a good couple of years to dig into it. And that sounds like a long time, but I had 2 things going and I had 5 new employees that I inherited. They didn't know, what they were going to be doing. So it was a lot of really just discovery, and understanding it. In the middle of COVID, though, I think it was 2021, um, I was called by our chief procurement officer letting me know that we were going to be moving to procurement. And
Interesting.
yes, and I would have to restructure who I had. Um, Again, I inherited an MSP and I inherited the technology. So I was giving up the background checks, which was great. I left that in HR and I was able to take just 2, well, actually took 3 people with me over to procurement. to continue the journey of what we have today. And it was a little rough, not for me as much, but another person who's still with me, and she's evolved over time into more of a supplier management role. But I mean, she has grown in like leaps and bounds. But here we are, almost 7 years later, and we are. It wasn't great for her. She was mad. She didn't want to go. That's a whole other, thing that you have to deal with. And so I had to manage that, whether she stayed or not, but she stayed. She stuck with me, and we moved over to procurement, and we couldn't have changed technology. We couldn't have done what we've done, and I'll get to that, but the whole business case and how we manage it today, none of that would have happened in HR. And it's no offense against, HR. I think there's a place, just like there's a place for MSPs, there's a place for contingent labor to sit in HR. Um, I couldn't go any further with what I had being in HR. I needed somebody that was going to support technology changes, that was going to support something different, that was going to support governance and maybe just a different way of looking at how we manage contingent labor as a whole. So it was all in all, because you've talked to me today, super positive move. And I had the support, and I had somebody, I had a leader that actually had done some things like this before in other companies. And so they understood contingent labor. I didn't have that on the HR side. I just didn't have that support or understanding. Everybody looked at it more from a TA perspective instead of any sort of like strategic group or cost savings group or any of the things, right? Or good talent. They didn't look at it the same as they look at full-time employees. It just was it was hard for me to make any traction over there. So
Quick
I
question for
came,
you.
yeah.
Sorry to dive in. Just kind of thinking out loud. With regards to that program, how was it composed at that point? And I know you're going to come on to the next stage next, but at that point, how was it composed in terms of what I would class as like pure contingent labor, like contractors versus services procurement or statement of work type engagements? What was the split at that stage?
So it was a little similar to what it is today, but it was so unknown. So what you had to,
Right.
and it was so complicated. So what you had to do is you were in HR, but you were passing all your SOW work to sourcing, to procurement.
Right.
They were still doing all the contracting. And I never, that was the hard part for me to wrap my brain around at the time. It was so, I would call it decentralized in a way. Literally, the system, the tool, the VMS was literally just housing the people at that
Right.
point. There was
Yeah.
no, and IT had their own, I would call it supplier governance, or their team that was actually managing the SLAs and all the things allegedly on paper, like they were managing those things. And I'm not talking bad about it, but it's like, how deep are they going? I don't know, because I wasn't managing them. Like that's in a whole other department. So it kind of decentralized, because you've got IT having their hands in the pot, you've got HR kind of just managing the VMS tool and the dollars, maybe not even that, just like looking at it from a report. It was very basic in my opinion compared to what it is today. And then sourcing was definitely, in control of those SOWs and really managing all of that work. And all the billing was going through through Oracle at that time. So everything was just being billed, through a purchase order. I can't even remember, Johnny, because I wasn't ever in the system enough before we switched to even understand. I mean, I don't think there was like billing out of the system from a program standpoint at that time. It would have had been our MSP that was doing it. I'm clear now that with the new technology, because I went through that whole process, but being on something that I inherited, I don't remember it being at all that robust. And by that time, it was outdated, and Beeline had bought them, and it was, they were pushing me to upgrade to the Beeline version of well, to Beeline, and I wasn't going to do it. So Um, does that answer your question? I mean, it was very, and everybody had their hands in the pot. IQN was wide open because there was no configuration changes. So any kind of places where there might have been, something open, there was no compliance or governance around that
Yeah,
system.
it does make sense. It's certainly quite a common story that you hear. Um, I'd say even more common if you take one step back from even legacy technology like IQN. A lot of companies just have no technology capturing
Oh
this
yeah,
stuff.
spreadsheets. Yeah, the whole yeah.
Spreadsheets, email, Slack,
Mm-hmm.
Teams, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and that's and the problem that you mentioned, which we'll come back to, I'll come back to later, around decentralization, is super common.
Yeah.
Um, but that's a really interesting juncture in your journey to see what the status quo was at that point, and then from that point, you're moving under a kind of procurement umbrella, and I guess, like you say, that's where everything changed, really.
Yes, for sure. And I will go back. There was a lot of email. There were email, that's where all our tickets came in. There was no sort of intake. There was no sort of control around what were the requests coming in. So to that point, email was the thing. Drove me nuts. I come from we got to have data. You can't have data if you've got emails. If you've got five different ways of the work coming in, there's no way you're going to ever understand the work at that
But
point.
this, for me, when I look at the amount of spend involved in services procurement, um, it's so massive, and it's usually, according to David Orme, who's ex Cox Communications that I was chatting to recently, who now works for Pontoon. He was saying in his experience, for large organizations, it's usually around 10 times the spend of contingent labor if you mount up all of the services procurement. And even in mid-sized organizations, it's like 4 to 6 times the spend. So I just find it incredible how many organizations, like you're saying, an area where you're like, we have tech, we capture this stuff, I've got data, I make decisions based on data.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
amount of companies that right now have not even started on that side of it, and they are emails, spreadsheets. It's when you look at the level of spend, you just think, wow, that feels it's just hard to believe sometimes. But that is the situation for a lot of people, and it's kind of crept up on them because the focus was always on the contractor side of things. That's where the MSP programs came from. That's where
Right.
the VMS technology came from. And with the procurement technology, that was normally based around, it kind of came out of the ERP systems, transformation into the procure to pay, source to pay suites. They're very predicated around things that you can buy, goods, materials,
Hmm.
guided
Hmm.
buying, cataloging.
Hmm.
Services wasn't as important. It's now possibly more important, and it's more complicated. So a lot of companies are in that situation that you're describing historically, where you were, or actually not as good a situation like that, because they probably didn't even have any tech, or they probably don't have any tech in a lot of situations. But it's
Hmm.
like you say, I can't get my head around how a company can operate without that data.
Hmm.
But a lot of people are trying to.
They are. And to your point, I think a lot of them are like, oh, it's not too much. It's not too much. Like we've got, 1,000 contractors or 150, or we're not managing that much right now, so it's okay. But it can grow overnight, and then you're in a place where how do I even baseline? Well, we couldn't, we still struggle a little bit because I've got some things out of program, and I'll get there, but getting just a spend number sometimes, having the data categorized right so that you know exactly what, or you're having your arms around the spend of this can get a little bit crazy, especially if you're using, five different ways to track it. So yeah, so we moved to procurement, and my first job was to get us off of IQN and find a new technology. So I did do an RFP out of the gate. We were just getting back to the office, like, kind of a hybrid model. We still are hybrid, but kind of getting back to the office. I just remember there weren't that many people in the office. And I hired my right-hand person from Chipotle as a contractor to come in and help. But we had already done the RFP and implemented our new technology. I will say we use Workday Venly. Um, but actually chose them through an RFP process, and I chose them before they were bought by Workday. So they were just
Oh, right,
starting.
interesting.
So I've been with them for, I think this is 4 years, maybe.
Yeah,
Uh,
they were acquired 2.5, 3 years ago,
they
something like
were.
that.
Yes, and we rolled it out January 2nd, 2022, I believe, is when we actually rolled that out. And then I had one more person join me in March. So we had rolled it out in January to help, and I had an outsourced PM that kind of helped with that. But the MSP, Venly, and myself, my little tiny team, rolled that out pretty blindly. I would say it was probably one of those implementations it was nothing like I had ever done. I'm used to testing and testing and more testing before we actually go live, just, with experience and we rolled it out. I felt like I was rolling the dice too with something new. Again, I'm a big fan of I would say startups, people that are just starting, because to me, I know they're going to be flexible, they're going to move faster, it's not going to be as hard to get something fixed. I want to help them grow. I want to give them, my feedback to say this is what works or doesn't work. I want to grow with them. Those kinds of feels. So it came to be the right thing for us at the time. It's still right for us. I think, the other folks that I looked at from a technology perspective were either I wasn't impressed, or it was too much. It was too
Yeah,
much from a change management position to take our business and move them from IQN that was wide open, they could do whatever they wanted, to something that was really formal. And I think for a more mature program, we weren't there yet. I mean, and a lot of people I've talked to um, are like, oh, I either changed my MSP and then I changed my technology, or went to an MSP from an in-house model and then I changed my technology. And for me, I think from the way my head works, I felt like the technology had to be first. I had to get some sort of tool and foundation in place in order to begin a journey of how do I change the mindsets and behaviors of the business? How do I get everybody operating a little differently? Um, I think I needed to have the technology in place to do that. And not everybody thinks that way, but that's the way I felt like that was the right next thing to do. So we rolled out Venly, and that was like the beginning of a journey. It took us a year to really get everybody to adopt and learn and understand Venly wasn't broken. It was just doing what it was supposed to, which was to govern what you're doing in the system. So that was like, I think I spent that whole year having that same conversation 1,000 times, like over and over again. Like it's not broken, it's good, it's not bad, and changing the perception of the technology um, to get my arms around. At the same time, well, what are we doing? Like what does the MSP do? What do we do? And really understand that whole, it sounds weird because I'd had it for a couple of years, but again, COVID, weird time, weird situation, learning on the fly at home with people in other countries. It was a lot of more just discovery, like I said earlier. Um, so getting that technology in place was the first step. And then from there, after that year was over in 2023, my boss and I started talking about like, where do we go from here? How do we evolve? How do we transform? How do we change the way that we handle, services and contingent labor, like the staff augmentation of the world. But so I began like trying to come up with an in-house model. There was a time I did do an RFP for a different MSP. So I went through, it was kind of I don't know, like a journey of, okay, I think I might need another MSP. Like maybe that's the problem. And I think that I had to go through all of those steps in order to understand where I was going to end up. And so I did that RFP, and I did a ton of due diligence and looked at different MSPs and what is it I'm going to get from this one that I don't get from this one. And because at that point I was really struggling with strategy. I was struggling with um, I didn't feel like I had the autonomy to affect the change that I wanted to affect. Having an MSP, they were handling the day to day, but and this is no offense because I think there's a place for MSPs. So I want to make that very clear. In the model I had, I felt like I needed a little bit more autonomy and control in order to create the change that we wanted to do. Um, so I was looking for another MSP that would, be more strategic or be more, involved, or somebody that I could actually partner with in a way to be at a different umbrella level. And it was very tactical. It
Right.
was very transactional, and it was administrative. And
Yeah.
I didn't need administrative help. And it just felt like, what are they doing that we can't do? Um, it was definitely a lot of talking about that internally. And my boss and I, I think we had to wait, we had to go through that RFP, decide that another MSP is not going to do us any good. It's a lot of change management in itself to change from one to another. And
Yeah.
if we're going to eventually go, internal potentially, should we even do that right now? Should we just give it another year, try to get this MSP where we need them, you know? And again, they weren't failing in general. They were just, it wasn't a fit for where we wanted to be. If that makes sense, because you know,
It does
I've
make
definitely,
sense, and
okay.
I think the point that you're making um, about your strategic control, your need to move quickly, the situation your organization was in at that point in time, it just didn't suit you, particularly if the offerings aren't giving you what you need at that point in time in terms of control. If what you needed at that point of time in time was just that administrative, tactical kind of like outsourced support, then great. But it's something we can come back to a little bit later because I think that part of the market is has recognized that and is
Hmm.
moving more in that direction. But for you guys at that point, and this I love this because this is exactly how my brain works. Zivio was a startup, is a scale up. I've pretty much always worked in startups. I
Hmm.
love it. I just want to go
Hmm.
100 miles
Yes.
an hour, get stuff done, lead, follow, or get out of the way. That kind of mentality. And it's great seeing how you brought that to these problem solving exercises, and this one happening to have moved around, sat under HR and then moved under procurement. And interesting to see the leverage that you got when you were under procurement. So at this point, you're thinking, right, now I really want to put the hammer down. There's some serious change management that's going to go on here. If I have an MSP in place as well, that's going to make it more complicated than me just clearing the decks and just going straight ahead with what I want to do. You'd already done the technology at this point.
Yes. Yes, and again, a year prior, I tried to see if I wanted another MSP, and that was the problem. You know how you sometimes you feel like something's bothering me, but I don't know what it is, and you kind of grasp at like maybe it's this. Nope, that's not it. And maybe it's this. No, it's not that. That's not it. I think that's kind of what I was doing without knowing I was doing it. So when I went to do this RFP for another MSP, I realized at that moment that it's not going to be any different. Like, it's not going to give me exactly what I'm looking for. And what I'm looking for is, a few things, but it could evolve into more things. And maybe that's just better done in-house. And I'm also somebody that didn't come from and you and I talked about this, I think, but I didn't come from I still don't. I didn't come from the SIA groups, or I didn't have a lot of peers in the industry because I came up during COVID, and it was kind of like an isolated time.
Yeah,
And
the
so I
events weren't running and
yeah, I never really attended all of those. I actually didn't really ask for this. They gave it to me to do. And so it was one of those inheritance things that I had to kind of learn on my own. And then I'm the type that just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean I want to do it until I look into it and see if it's really right for me. And so um, I'm not the typical contingent labor owner. I think I know who the players are and the people that, have been doing this their whole careers. This isn't what I've done my whole career. So I think I see it in a little different light. I think I've had a different lens on what contingent labor and procurement services means and how does that fit at Western Union. And so my boss and I talked about it and we decided to allow me to build a business case to try to sell for us to go forward as an in-house program and let our MSP go. I luckily was friendly with, friendly enough where I think they knew it was coming. We did our due diligence for a good, 6 months or longer, making sure that we understood, because I think sometimes people don't understand what the MSP is doing for them because they leave it up to them to do it, right? It just gets done and we're kind of managing it on the inside. Um, I guess I would hope that people do understand, but I didn't always understand what the MSP was doing. Again, I inherited it and I needed to, really figure out like what is your role versus what are we doing and what do I need to understand that you're doing. So, flash forward, I did a business case, and I don't know how deep you want me to go with this. People have been wanting my secrets, and there's not really a secret. I think, my business case was very basic, and I had to make it simple in order for me um, to be able to say that this is better. I mean, since then I look at IT in our company, I look at call center, I look at um, accounting. We've gone and being at Western Union almost 10 years, it goes back and forth. We're going to outsource it. Oh, no, now we're going to insource it. Nope, now we're going to outsource it. That's so it's more black and white and flexible. I think contingent labor is one of those things. It's a definite program where you have to, you got to be thoughtful. You got to think about, how is this going to look from the customer side, the supplier side, and the finance side, the procurement, all of it. And it was a little bit of melding everything together. So I basically, built a case where we would be self-funded, supplier funded. I shouldn't say self-funded, supplier funded, just like the MSP was supplier funded.
Cost neutral, basically.
So now I was building a case to where I'm going to pay for these people I'm going to hire through the program.
Right.
And we're going to stand this up as an internally managed program, and still leverage what we were leveraging before. And basically, if you look at it from a high level, we're kind of like our we're our own MSP. We're our own little function. And I would say at this point, I just did this exercise. I have an organization of 25 people now, but it's procurement ops and it's across all of sourcing and the source to pay. I own the source to pay process basically. So that's a lot of sitting on my side. But before it was, I hired 9 people to get this stood up. We probably only had 4 or 5 people on the MSP side when I separated from them. So
Right.
there were only 3 of us or 4 of us, and then 5 on that side. I hired 9 people, and started establishing more of an organization that not only handled this, but handled, procurement ops. But the 9 people, I was able to write the business case in order to cover those salaries. And for the first 6 months, it was actually for the first year and a half, which was up until December of 2025. That was my year and a half mark. Um, you know, those were covered. And I have about 4 people doing full-time, I would say, contingent labor out of my whole organization, and that's it right now. There's people that touch it, and from a governance perspective or from a reporting and data analytics perspective, but full-time, contingent labor, I really only have 4 people doing that.
What there's so many great points here. There's a lot of interesting stuff to cover. I've made quite a few notes, so I've got a few things that I'd like to kind of like just sort of pull at the threads in a little bit more detail. Firstly, when you're talking about taking it in-house, it feels to me like at that point in time, the expertise that you needed or the experience that you needed for what you needed to do within your organization, you weren't feeling like that sat in an MSP that you could just draw on it. And I think that feels like where MSPs are changing, certainly with regards to services procurement, procurement of services, how you kind of want to define it. But that they're investing now. They've had to invest in procurement expertise because their expertise had previously very much sat more HR, TA, pure contract labor kind of expertise, which they've got very deep domain knowledge. It's mature offering. Now that services procurement is starting to get involved and it's part of this whole external labor, contingent labor picture, they've recognised that if they want to be credible at taking that change management into organisations, they need to have people in their organisation who've done that, and they need to have that procurement domain expertise. So I definitely think that's something that's becoming more available now. It's absolutely maturing, but at the point that you were doing it, you're like, well, this is just, we're paving new road here, and we're going to have to do it on our own.
Yes, and that just sparked a whole bunch of things I want to say about that because I think one, I have procurement background, so that was good, right? Like I had that, and I didn't understand when I was in HR, like why are we going out to, sourcing to do that? It was so back and forth. When I did build the business case, it got approved. I actually, we have, and I'm going to give you just like a high level of how our organization is in procurement. So you've got your CPO, and then you've got me, and you've got a peer of mine that handles the whole, what they call the strategic sourcing side, which is basically all contracting work. It's all anything that's, high dollar, big deals, services, all the things. They're handling all of that. And then we have a buy desk, which is more commoditized, which now sits with me. But um, that's pretty much how we're structured. There's contingent labor, there's strategic sourcing, and then there's a buy desk or the commoditized, the buying, the low dollar transactional buying. When I first wrote this business case, got it approved, implemented, which we can go into some of those details if you want on how I did that transition, because I think that transformation, because that's a big, I think a lot of people have questions like, how did you do it? Like, how did you do it fast? And I did it really fast. So we can talk about that. But I think what on the topic that you're asking right now, we have arms of category managers and they're handling, across the organization. I asked the CPO to move that one vertical into my group, and they were in my group for 6 months to really get them up to speed on contingent labor, how it works. They were handling the contracting, but there wasn't a lot of strategic work happening, and there wasn't a lot of understanding of how it all tied together. And I asked to have them just under my group so that we could really get them up to speed and understand our vision, where we want to go with this, and then how do they help and how do they partner with us to make sure that we're getting the contracts written right, that we're able to categorize everything right, that we're able to govern and manage that on the back end. Everything was going into Vinley anyway. So what does that actually look like? And so they were with me for 6 months. And this is one of those key things that I think my mind went to. I asked for, I made it happen. It's not something that you'd think to do. We're all in the same group anyway. It doesn't mean that I have to, have the people under me, but it was a chance for them to be incorporated into my team that was handling the more transactional day to day, but also had a vision from contingent labor standpoint so that they could help, they could partner, they could assist in that area. And now they are back in that sourcing side and it's much more dialed in. We're all on the same page. We're all aligned. We're all going towards the same goals. We're trying to, get in front of the business, do the planning, get them to really understand them, me being the business, to understand really what they're doing when they're asking for the services and the people. What does that mean from a procurement standpoint and a spend perspective? I don't know if that is kind of what you're asking, but I think that is one part of my journey that helped us stand that up and get more involved. It was so, I'm going to say decentralized again, but disparate. Like it was just so all over the place before. And this has really put us in the forefront of all, the buying piece of this or the purchasing or the contracting piece of it. Yeah, I don't know if
Quick question for you. So I appreciate this is going to be like very organization specific, but if you look at, and let's use that you kind of using the blanket term of contingent labor to cover the contracting side and the
Yeah.
service procurement side. So if you take that bracket, in most organizations, do you think that is likely to be more effectively kind of controlled or centralized under procurement or under HRTA? And obviously it depends how the organization is structured, but if we generalize about it, do
Hmm.
you think that is something that, who should be leading this? Because that's something that comes up a lot at the conferences and stuff that we discuss. And people go all over the place with it. But you mentioned the fact that you wouldn't necessarily have had the agility and the decision-making process to do the change management under HR. And HR has a much broader range of responsibilities. Do you think it's more effective for that to be controlled under procurement or HR?
I'm going to say 100%. I still look at my HR department. They're not where they're not up on the contingent labor side. They really don't understand it. And I don't think it's just it's not just Western Union. I think that's across the board. It's not their wheelhouse. And if you're having to go to procurement from a contractual standpoint, anyway, like to me, it makes complete sense. I think even leading this type of program with procurement background is super important because you understand how it all fits together. It's not only just, procurement doing this. I am so tight with legal in my company. That was part of, the buy-in from a business case as well. But I utilize our internal legal team all the time. I mean, all the time. Um, Finance was a big part of this. I mean, we had at the time in procurement, we reported to the COO. So we were under operations at the time. We've only been under the CFO for like the last 6 months. But that was, at the time kind of important because there was more of the process piece that took place in the standards and there was a lot of focus on the customer service. It was like a journey. And now we're under the, CFO and I feel like I'm pushing metrics and I'm pushing performance and I'm pushing the financial side of it. And it's kind of evolved just perfectly in my opinion. I think it can sit either place depending on talent in your HR, like what their skill sets are. Not that they're bad or good, but what their skill sets are. But if you want to do something strategic and transformational, I think you have to be in procurement. I just absolutely believe that. It's about the money, but it's also about the tools. It's about the metrics. It's about the performance. There's a lot more going on there, I feel like, from a skill set perspective and how you partner with the rest of the business.
Yeah, I think it comes back to I made some notes about kind of when you were talking about working at Chipotle and that kind of startup mentality and having that kind of, more of a kind of, broad spectrum of experience and skill sets that you built up. Because in a startup and a scale up, you end up getting, if you're a smart person, people go, hey, can you make this happen? Hey, can you make that happen?
Hmm.
Go and talk to these
Hmm.
guys, go and talk to those guys, make it all
Absolutely.
work. That's the great bit that gets everyone fired up, and it's the bit that makes you feel tired as well.
Yes,
So it's not for
exactly.
everybody.
You got to
Not
be
for
careful what
everybody.
you wish for.
Exactly. But it's, you bring a pragmatic approach, you like to move fast. All of those things tie into that. And I was going to ask you kind of like what skills do you think brought most value from that startup life? But I feel like it's having the ability to be flexible and to deal with those different stakeholders. And HR to do, you don't necessarily need a startup mentality to be good at HR. To be good at HR, you need to be empathetic. You need to be strategic in how you think about people and
Hmm.
capacity and all these sorts of things and careers and changing with skill requirements. There's a lot to it.
Hmm.
But procurement is very different. And that's where it always fascinates me because people come to procurement, people come to HR quite often from an HR background, HR qualifications training, all that way through. Procurement, people are coming in from all different angles, and it's like a bit of a get stuff done department, but only if it is. Otherwise, it can be a real underachieving department where people are just kind of
Absolutely.
sitting there and being the police. So I think The thing that, just to round up what I'm getting at, is I think the fundamental thing that people like yourself bring to this is a business approach, where you're thinking about the business and you're thinking about, and that's where I think strategic procurement can be enormously strategic in terms of what does the business want to achieve. We're a kind of, we're here and we're a kind of fixer, and we're an interface between the internal world and the external world of getting stuff done and buying what we need. That's very pragmatic. And if you've got a business-like approach to it, you have to be able to interface with all these different departments, really. And I think, do you feel like that was a benefit coming from that world?
Absolutely. And you just sparked something that I would love to share, which is, and I'm going to go back to where I said I did it. I hired the 9 people and I did it in 30 days.
Wow.
Um, yeah, in very short conversations. But what I want to say about that and why I'm mentioning it, not so much about the timing, but about the skills I brought in to the team. Because what you were saying is like, so I'm resonating with it, right? Like I have a vast background. My right-hand person, technical background too. She's, we grew up at Chipotle, but she came over and we've utilized our skill set from moving fast, going public, all the things, right? Understanding, you know, how to avoid risk in all of the change, how to manage people's behavior and all of the change, like how to get people on board and excited about things. Those are things that I think we brought to the table. But also, I can't stress enough. Like I left Chipotle having like what I call an IT business team, and I'm going to say that because it was this weird model, and now I have this larger version of it in a weird way that sits in procurement and it does a lot of the same things and more. And so when I hired the people I hired, I had several internal candidates at my like analyst level. They got promotions, but they came from other parts of Western Union. So I brought in some Western Union knowledge at a very administrative tactical level, hoping to, grow them in their careers. And then from the leadership perspective, I brought in a program manager and a senior manager of my ops team that are that both have contingent labor background. They both have worked for MSPs. They both have, no procurement experience, which is hilarious. One has a lot of HR experience, and I actually have one person at the intake level that's a senior analyst, and she came from the TA department in our HR department. So and I've talked about this in other when I've spoken, at different times about this actual topic because I didn't just bring in like, a whole bunch of contingent labor people to do the contingent labor. I brought in a vast variety of skill sets to get the job done. I had a vision of who needed to do what. I have 2 gentlemen that came outside the company for my data and analytics, but they're accounting and finance guys. So like I have really brought in a vast variety of skill sets to create this whole, and some of them didn't even know anything about this, about contingent labor. And so, and services and procurement for that matter, like none of them had ever sat in those departments. So I think it's from my experience, and that's all I can speak to. I think procurement makes a ton of sense. I think I consider myself lucky for inheriting this and being able to transform something in the way that I have, and bringing all these other people in, whether they liked it or don't like it. They all have the same mindset. They're driven, they're motivated, they're excited. My program manager, he's my biggest cheerleader. Like he's always, this is amazing what we're doing here, and I'm so excited to be a part of this. Like this is something nobody's doing, for example. I think people are doing it in different levels, but I think just being a part of it, it was super important to me to have a diverse group of people on this journey, and I do. And they're the ones that have made it happen. I think it made my vision in my head come to life.
Yeah, that's great. And I think talking about that kind of diversity of background, diversity of experience, different approaches, mindsets, the ability to communicate with different departments, um, the change management aspect
Mm-hmm.
is fundamental to this whole external capacity conversation. like I say, if you just take the contract and temp side of it, there's a fairly clear path to do that. And the MSPs are very well versed in that side of it as well. But that's been around since 2000. Kind of that was in the early days of it. But when you take the services procurement, the statement of work side of it, for a lot of organizations, that's where a large part of the change management has to take place. And unfortunately, it touches a lot of departments. And it's a lot of internal buyers that need to get stuff done, and they need to get stuff done right now. Getting the buy-in and making that change management process happen, you've got a kind of tactical unit, or tactical strategic, but like a SWAT team that can get this stuff done. But it sounds like you had some pretty good, or you were able to get good executive buy-in to this as well in terms of supporting that. So I feel like that's quite important. Would you agree?
I do. I do, and I've spoken about this before. It's so important. I think my business case, it went up through finance at the time. Again, I wasn't reporting to the CFO. I do now, but he had to say yes to this. And I went, to legal. I went to well, it was mostly, it was finance and legal that I really had to get the buy-in for this. And then my VP was all in. I mean, I think it was scary in some ways because we hadn't really seen it, and it almost was scary simple once I wrote the business. It was overwhelming to think about how am I going to write this? What am I going to like? How am I going to express, what I'm envisioning, and how is that going to come out on paper financially? It ended up being a lot more simple. I think the hardest thing is trying to get other executives in the company to even understand what we do. I still feel like I'm explaining things, and I'm in a company where we switch over leadership quite a bit. Not
Right.
like not because it's bad, but I think we have a somewhat newer CEO, and that whole a new CFO. But leadership in the IT world has changed a lot and shifted a ton since I've been in the last 2 to 3 years. So really getting them up to speed every time somebody new comes on, like how does it work here? Because at my old company, this is how it worked. So my VP did a great job, I think, amongst his peers to get them to understand what we were doing. But it has literally taken, you know, 2 years for people to understand what we actually did. And it was a huge thing. And it wasn't small. And I think it's just now catching up. And I tell you, like, change management is still happening. It's
Yeah.
happening all of the time. I'm still like we're getting ready. My VP and I are going to do a roadshow this year for procurement in particular because the perception, we implemented another new tool, which is our intake tool, a procurement tool, which is pretty well known now. It's new, but it's a startup. And we're helping that they got to move faster for us because we're moving fast, right? And
Good.
and it's become the tool. But people, view our technology as awful because they're so reluctant to adopt anything new. Nobody wants to change how they do things. They want to go around the system. They want to, get their stuff done, like you said, as soon as possible at any cost. So getting people to really take a step back, our CFO has been like super in slowing things down and really, understanding what we're spending money on. How does that look from this area? Um, I think putting some gates in place have been helpful. I might have just veered off of your original
No, no,
question, but
no, no, no.
getting
That
that buy-in. And we're we're because I have my own, this is the piece I'm going to say about the MSP too. Because I have my own team that are full-time employees, the ownership has been such a big key to the change and the
right.
success of the change. I could have never done what we have done, especially this fast, without having it internal and having our own employees. At least I never saw that happening outside with an MSP. When you are actually an employee of the company that you're trying to affect the change, like it becomes more of an ownership. It's an ownership thing, in my opinion. Everybody on my team has a stake in this. Like they want this to succeed. We're killing like our metrics when it comes to different things that we manage. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think the buy-in has been it had to be there for the business case, but then now the buy-in, when you talk about buy-in, it's more about them understanding what we actually are and what we do and how we can help them and how we can serve them and all of those things. I mean, that's the new phase. If you would have told me 6 years ago this is going to take 6 years for you to get to this place, I probably would have been so overwhelmed. I would have been overwhelmed.
Yeah,
And last year, yeah, I kind of try to have a theme every year with my team of like what's this year going to be about. And last year was definitely you have to start somewhere.
yeah,
The
yeah,
first
yeah.
6 months was getting it up and running and getting everybody trained and getting everybody settled and trained in even just contingent labor. But this last year was our first full year, and it was literally like we have to start somewhere. So like anytime something seemed overwhelming, it's like, well, let's just start here and work our way to whatever that goal is. And I'm a firm believer in is if you identify something, you got to do something, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, there's the only was it there's nothing worse than a bad decision other than no decision.
Yes,
And it's just that kind of one step at a time mentality. Otherwise, it
yes,
is just totally overwhelming. And I think the problem that has existed in the market, particularly around the services procurement side of this whole kind of external labor story, is the fact that it's just too big to do for a lot of people. Like you say, some of the tools, the cost, the implementation time, the amount of spend that needs to be included in the program straight away, the change management, if it's got to be big, people just can't move it. And so it
yeah.
doesn't progress. Whereas actually, I'm seeing a lot more evidence now of people start small, eat the elephant one bite at a time,
Hmm.
prove it, move on, prove it,
Hmm.
move on, and actually build that support internally. And I think when you talk about the buy-in, it's really interesting listening to you talking about the change management buy-in, which is more across the organization, and then the executive buy-in, and actually getting people to understand it. But I think once the C-suite grasp the fact that, you know, this is about the organization getting work done, whatever service that organization is providing or whatever product they're selling to their customers, work needs to be done. So the people running the company need to know what's our total capacity, what's our total capability, what are my options? If I want to get something done, how can I do it? If this changes, what's going to cover me? And when organizations don't have services procurement covered or within a program or visible, which most organizations don't, they're just missing out a chunk where it's just that's a fundamental part of how their organization does things. And therefore, it directly affects their ability to compete in the market. So that's where, again, it comes back to me. I always have to suspend disbelief sometimes if people are just not interested in trying to grasp this stuff, because it's like, well, how's your organization going to compete in the market? If you're spending 600 million or 1.5 billion a year on this stuff and you haven't got it under control, that's a pretty big risk to take, it feels like to me, in terms of, well, what if your main competitor actually does have this stuff under control? They're going to have better supplier relationships. They're going to get better work out of their suppliers. They're going to save costs. They're going to manage risk better. So I think the executive side of it, if you can explain it in the right way and if they're enlightened to that, that's sometimes easier than getting the buy-in from the actual people within the organization, because they're just thinking, something else I have to do, another hoop I have to go through. But that's where you guys have got to win the hearts and minds and say, look, we're here to help you. We're here to help the business. We're not here to be in your way.
Yeah, all of that. And when you were talking just now, I was thinking about, managed services and then your time and material, your fixed fees, all of the SOW work that we've done over the years. It's been very between, you know, the business, the supplier, and, the procurement person. And our program was really left out of it unless it was just to administratively like put them in the system and manage that. We've taken it such a different level now, and we're so intertwined. And I have a new vision this year. It's like you got to start somewhere. Last year, this year is like it's really getting back to procurement. What is procurement here for? Like why are we here? Because in a lot of companies, the business kind of can get a hold of driving the spend, for their own purposes, and we can get lost in the convenience versus the the value or the best for your money, right? Or what does that look like? And I'm treading lightly here to not like say, I think it happens across the board. I think you sometimes you have the business driving where we go for the people, what people we have, all the things. And I'm trying to get my group more mature in a way of where you want to come to us to get the
Right.
best talent, but you also want to come to us to get the best suppliers. We have, I mean, there's so many little details I haven't told you today about what we've done since we brought it in-house, and it's really my structure. It's the way I utilize my team, the way that we have evolved over time, in the little things. It's the little things. It's Venly has an SOW module. We use it. I think we're one of the top customers that use it the most. Um, and we have since day one. And every SOW is in there, but we also have, and I'm going to say this, Level Path and that those are the Workday strategic sourcing guys. I'm sure you've heard of Level Path because it's
Yeah, I know
it's
those
hot
guys.
right
Yeah.
now. And we were there at the beginning. I was given Level Path, I don't know, 3 years ago when they were first starting, like, hey, take a look at this and see if we can use this, Erin. And then, we ended up implementing it as our intake tool, but we're using it for so many other things now. And reporting is one of them, and data is one of them. Compliance is one of them. Understanding the work. You need some sort of method to understand the work. I guess where I was going on the SOW side, managed services originally was ran outside of the program, but all of the fixed fee and time and materials was in program, but there wasn't a whole lot of governing still or say in how that's categorized and how that's done. I mean, I've put myself or inserted our team into, we got to be the deciding factor of how this, is categorized. Build the work requirements. Tell me what the work's going to be, but let's talk about how this should look and how it should be categorized, because I know a lot of companies have issue with this. I mean, this is a struggle we have in contingent labor is, are we categorized right? Are we funneling things through one way because we don't want it to be seen on the other side, right? Or is it SOW, but really it's staff log? There's a whole lot of that. I mean, I'm just giving you some highlights of places where we've gone in and really dug in. My right-hand person leads a governance vertical. I was very adamant about having a risk and kind of compliance arm in my group to manage all of procurement and how we actually do the work and how are we, looking at SOW, unused spend, things that I think you're kind of alluding to from a governing perspective of managed services. How are the suppliers performing? Scorecarding, all the things. That's all, and I'm getting there. But again, if you told me 6 years ago it was going to take me like 10 years to get there, I probably would have been like, I don't want to do this. But it's
It's
just
such a
I
big
keep
thing,
going to
though.
the next thing.
Yeah,
What,
and
what,
it's such a big thing. But the thing I really appreciate about what you guys are doing, what you and your team are doing at Western Union is you've there's been a recognition that this, you talk about the SOW stuff, the services procurement stuff, this external capacity, it needs a specific focus. I mean, getting it under control, it's not like trying to get to Mars, as in it's not beyond the realms of current, capabilities. It is difficult though. There's a lot to it. And
yeah.
especially when it's a fairly small team, a lean team, trying to affect that sort of change in a big organization that's done it maybe manually or semi-manually for a long period of time. But what people like you are doing, which is why I think it's great to highlight this conversation, you're admitting that there are still things you want to cover, and there's always more you want to do, and more maturity you can add to it. But you're going through and you're solving the problems and you're approaching it. And I love the fact that it emphasizes the difference of you're using technology to create clarity and to build data, which then gives you a really great argument. You can't argue with the data, and that's where the kind of
Yes.
finance element comes into it. Whether you're talking to the C-suite or whether you're talking to business stakeholders, if you're armed with some evidence and some data, which you can only collect by having this stuff digitized or digitalized, however you want to kind of describe it, but capturing this information in a system, then you can do something with it. Then you can use those insights. And you might start with simple insights to start with, but when you can layer on complexity as you go. And so I just think for organizations that are looking to do this, unless you can effectively bring this problem into light and get the data and bring it into some sort of technology, whatever that fits within your stack, you can't scale without it. Because trying to get your arms around this on a kind of manual, semi-manual, Excel, how can procurement teams scale with that? You can't. It's again back to this transactional versus strategic. The transactional stuff should be automated, and it's not a threat to people's jobs. It just means that those people can concentrate on the strategic stuff that they're not doing if they're neck deep in trying to manage manual SOWs that are zipping around all over the place. I'm going into a bit of a rant on that one, but I love what you're describing is absolutely what I see within organizations that are successful with this. Is somebody's got responsibility, there's a dedicated, targeted approach or function to solve the problem, and the problems go across all parts of the business. You center it around this dedicated function, using the correct technology, getting the data, then suddenly it just all starts to make sense from what I see. And it sounds like that's been the case for you guys, and I appreciate the journey's kind of ongoing, but it sounds like that you're bearing the fruit of it.
Yes, and we are definitely just, Level Path has quite a bit of AI built in, and I'm working like this year, I'm working with legal. Like that whole source to pay process is there's so much opportunity to streamline, but also, govern better as well. And so utilizing the tools, like you said, tech, I have one tech guy in procurement. He does all of our, and he reports into me too. So I'm like overseeing all the systems that we use and having that, you know, the right tool in place that can funnel the work and not have the manual intervention.
So obviously, actually, in fact, one of the things I want to come on to next is I just want to get back to that MSP conversation for a minute.
Yeah.
So with the MSP side of things, you guys had that in place, legacy program, legacy technology, managing just the kind of contract labor side of it. You've then taken it in-house and just, massively executed with regards to the change management and transformed it, brought it under procurement, centralized it, and, you're off and running now and you're
Yes.
going great guns. What would your advice be? And I appreciate you kind of highlighted originally when you were saying, look, what they were doing was transactional, and that was not what I needed. But if you had advice for MSPs, for the companies where this is going to be the best option for them to have an MSP help them through this process, what would you want to see within those MSPs, and what advice would you give those MSPs?
Yeah, I had a lot to say on this lately, and because I feel like there has to be a shift. There's a lot in the contingent labor space, and this might be controversial, but I feel like there's a lot of we got to do it this way because this is the way we've always done it. And they're
Yeah.
not necessarily, people aren't necessarily saying that, but their actions display that to me. That's my perception of, there's not a good reason. Like, and I'm a big questioner. You probably picked up on that, but I am going to ask you maybe 10 questions. Like until I get an answer. And this isn't on MSPs necessarily. This is on just industry wide. And I'm going to be again controversial by saying that, but there's a bit of a staleness out there. I went to my first conference last summer and spoke at the conference, and good or bad, I feel like, we've gotten into a complacent place of how we manage our contingent labor programs. Everybody's hungry for something different, but nobody can kind of pinpoint or maybe get behind one thing that is going to drive the change. Um, I listen to people speak, and again, good or bad, I just didn't really pick up on anything or anybody doing something or thinking a different way. I think it's super important in anything that we do to challenge, to be bold, to, you know, think of different ways of doing things. And that might be my personality and not the thing that people want to do, but I feel it's very important in order to anytime transform or affect change, you have to challenge sometimes things that people just have done for forever. And it sounds kind of basic, but it's one of those things that through this process I've learned that we tend to accept so many things in companies in general, not just contingent labor, but just in general, process wise, um, technology wise, um, standards wise or not standards, leadership wise. Like there's just so many things that we just accept. And I'm not that person. I feel very grateful to have inherited this and been able to look at it from a different lens. MSPs, I think, are in the same boat. I think they have to think about and challenge their peers, challenge what really is the right thing to do. If I'm an outsourced company, what is it that, like, not guess, not try to sell the next thing, like really just think about it from a strategic level. They claim to be I mean, MSPs pretty much claim to be or helpful in strategic ways. I didn't see that. Even in my RFP process, I didn't see it. And it's not that I only have experience with one MSP. I think that if you're going to add value, you got to add it in a way where you are brought in with the business and you kind of meld yourself into that company so that you understand. So many MSPs have teams that are running with 5 different companies, or they're spread, beyond 2 companies. And I don't know how you really do a great job other than tactical work at that point or administrative work. Um, I remember the first QBR or the second QBR, I will say that I sat in with my MSP. I stopped it. I stopped it and I said, I don't want to see the slideshow. Like, let's talk about what you can do for me or what we can do for each other. How are we going to partner in this? Because I didn't understand why I was just trying to be sold all these things. Like, I thought you were here to help, and be an extension of the team. And it's a fine line with like if with a leader like I'm trying to transform something, how do I utilize an MSP and be able to control that in a way that I need and it control is a horrible way to say it, but have a stake
Leverage
in
it, I guess.
yeah, leverage it maybe is the right thing. So I guess my point is MSPs, I think, are going to have to think outside the box more. And I think the best way I can say it is to be bold and to say, okay, no, we follow each other, right? They're doing this, so I'm going to do this, or but what can I do differently? What's out there that's different? How can I think outside of the norm, and how can I be of service? It may not look anything like it looks like today. I don't think it can look like it does today and survive. I think you have to evolve. And right now, it just feels like everybody's in this place of being hungry. And I'm saying everybody, meaning customers, like companies, like me that run programs, plus the MSPs. Everybody's hungry for something different, but I don't know how bold people are being in doing so. So this is my general perception. It's my general, I don't know, opinion. I I don't know.
I,
It's gonna have
I,
to
I love
change.
it. I mean, I think, what you're saying is there's an opportunity for disruption. There's an opportunity
Yeah.
for people to think differently, do things differently. Um, that 100% resonates with me as a tech provider in the services procurement space. For us, it's all about disrupting the old and doing things and thinking about services procurement in a different way. And I think what it also brings in is it brings in that startup mentality. It comes back again to, hey, look, we're trying to solve a problem here. Don't just keep doing what we've always done. You'll get what you always got. Let's move on and look at how we can do something new. And I do think there is a hunger in the market. And that's why I think it's very important for these sort of conversations where you can really get into the detail for people to hear about the challenges and hear about the things that have gone well and hear about how you made change happen and how you're planning to make that change continue in the future and where you're trying to get to. So from a tech perspective, from an in-house perspective, procurement versus HR, how you make the change happen, how that reflects on the external service providers, the MSPs, how that reflects on the supply chain. All these things are super important to get into the detail of, which is why I think it's so valuable to be able to have this kind of chat. And in terms of the disruption and the need for change, everybody knows how fast everything is changing now. Everybody knows how much this disruption is happening in our daily lives, in our work lives. It's never been as crazy and as fast as this
right.
ever. So if there was ever a time for people to kind of like buckle up and get in for the ride and think in that way, now's got to be it.
For sure.
And so yeah, look, I thank you so much for sharing your story and talking through the process. I think from my point of view, this is obviously an ongoing journey for you guys. So I'd love it if maybe we have the opportunity to catch up a bit further down the line and see what the next steps look like. Like you say, every year you're kind of having a new vision for what you're going to be doing, and the team are getting on board with that. So I'd love to kind of follow where this gets to, but I'm just really appreciative of you taking the time to go through this and talk through the backstory and where it's got to, because I think it brings it to life really nicely, and hopefully it'll be really useful for other people to just be able to earwig on our conversation and hopefully take some useful stuff from it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me too. I like to share about this. I think it's, exciting for me, but also for my team. Yeah, I mean, I'm open to have any discussions. I think it's something I didn't want to share, a year and a half ago, and now I'm kind of in that place of let's just talk about it. I'm willing to share with anybody. So I think it's a good story. There's so much more to it. It's hard to do in an hour, but these are things, and I love talking with peers in the industry. If they have specific questions, there's different topics within the program I think people struggle with. So I try to, leave myself open for that as well if people want to reach out. So.
And what's the best way for other practitioners who've got other questions about this? And obviously, you're a busy person, but is it best for people to kind of like contact you via LinkedIn or just try and connect?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. Yeah, LinkedIn is great. That works perfectly.
Well, the more that the conversation can be brought forward, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, it's fantastic to have your voice in the conversation. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Johnny.